Today we're going to be talking about draping. Draping is one of the ways you can get started making your own clothes. Believe it or not, I draped that little gnome to make the jacket that I'm wearing. Also in this video, we're going to talk about a way that you can use it to be experimental and kind of make sculptures on the body. I'm excited to hang out with you in this video today and talk about draping. Some supplies for traditional draping: you need straight pins, a permanent marker, some scrap fabric, and scissors. The scrap fabric could be like an old bed sheet. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And for quick draping supplies, you need some duct tape, some aluminum foil, and a permanent marker. So I'm going to jump right into draping on a mannequin, and obviously I'm starting off here by ironing. Always try to iron your fabric if you have an iron, because you want your drape to be as smooth as possible. So having smooth fabric is going to help that process. Don't worry if you don't have a mannequin. I just wanted to show you kind of what traditional draping looks like, but our project today is actually going to be draping a non-traditional object. So don't stress if you don't have a mannequin. So if I'm draping something to fit a body, I like to think about bodies as curvy shapes or flat shapes, because those are generally kind of the two different types of bodies that I make clothes for. Draping is actually putting fabric or other materials on the body to create shapes. So when you're draping on the mannequin, you kind of want to have a mannequin or a dress form, which is what I'm using here, that's close to your size and body shape. So that's kind of tough, that you have to have a mannequin in the size that you want to drape. Some people will make mannequins or dress forms out of duct tape, or you can order mannequins or dress forms that can change shape and size. So there's lots of ways to deal with that. So I just kind of want to talk about some of the basic, most important things you need to think about when draping. So draping is basically lining up fabric on a dress form and smoothing it and pinning it until you get the shape that you're looking for. So I always tell my students that bumps are the enemy of draping. Unless you were trying to design like a bumpy thing, draping is a lot of smoothing. So this body shape mannequin that I'm working with, I would consider to be more of a curvy shape, because there's curves on the sides, there's curves around the chest area. So I utilize what's called a dart, and that's a fold that I will pinch and then pin down so that I can really contour that curve. So if you want something that's really fitted to a curvy shape, then you can pinch and you can pin until you're getting that sort of smooth fitted look. And then you can see here, once I've pinned everything down, I actually take a pen or a marker and I draw my armhole, I draw my neckline, I mark those darts. I'm also going through and I'm trimming down off anything extra, and I'm trying to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Seam allowance is this kind of weird phrase, and it means the extra fabric past your sewn line. And that's in case anything messes up or you need to let something out. You have like a little bit of extra fabric there to sew it together. So anything you sew has to have seam allowance. I always add a 1/2 inch. I think industry standard is 5/8 for straight seams and 3/8 for curved seams. And I just like to make it a 1/2 inch because it's easier to have it the same all the way around. So if you make a pattern and it doesn't have seam allowance, you should add that on, or it's not going to fit. It'll be too tight because you didn't add that little extra. You can see I've completely draped my front and it's very fitted. And the next step is to spin it around and do the exact same thing for the back. Once I get everything pinned up, the front and the back, and I've marked everything with a pin and I've trimmed all my seam allowance, then I take it off, and that's my pattern that I can then pin to the fabric and cut out and sew. But you'll learn the most about draping just by playing around and trying stuff. You can see here that you can even try draping non-fabric materials. You can do plastic or paper towels or whatever else you can find in your home. I actually draped my wedding dress out of brown paper. So now I want to show you kind of a quicker, faster way to drape If you don't have pins and fabric and maybe that draping process feels a little bit overwhelming, this is something a lot of cosplayers use. So they'll cover an area of a body or an object with aluminum foil and then go over it with duct tape or whatever tape you have. It could be masking tape. As you can see here, my duct tape is actually looks like bacon. So I just like covered the shoulder and the neck. Like let's say I was making some cool neck armor piece or something, and then I covered it with this bacon tape. And then the next thing I do is I take that Sharpie just like I did before, and I'm marking everything up. So I'm marking where the neck is, and I'm drawing maybe my cool armor shape. And then I'm actually drawing some lines that'll make it easier to sew. And then I'm going to number them. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. I'm going to say front, back. You cannot label your patterns too much. When you cut them apart, it looks so different and it's hard to remember what they were. Sometimes I'll even draw little symbols on the um, lines of each pattern piece so that I can match them up later, like a puzzle. I also take a picture before I take it off the mannequin because you can see I've cut up all these little pieces and now it's like, oh gosh, how do these go together? So having that picture is really handy. So probably my next step would be I would trace all these little pieces onto brown paper. I would add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to all the edges, and then I would transfer all my notes and markings. I actually love this aluminum foil tape process for making hats, and I'll transfer my pattern once I cut it up to thicker materials like foam. So you can use this technique in so many different ways. Okay, hopefully this is where it gets like really fun and maybe a little bit weird. um, Another thing you can do, you don't even have to drape a body. You can drape any kind of weird thing, which I always find very inspiring because fashion tends to repeat itself a lot. Like what was trendy 10 years ago becomes trendy again, and that's cool. But if you really want to do something different and innovative and unusual, bring things to the body that maybe have never been worn on the body before. So I love doing this project with students because the solutions are always super inspiring. And this is just a quick glimpse of what this process looks like. So I decided to drape a gnome. I think what you pick to drape really matters because sometimes I'll drape things, and I'll show you a few examples later. Things that are easy because I have it and it's there and it's quick and it's maybe not complicated. And then I don't really care about sewing it later because I didn't care about the object to begin with. Whereas I really love gnomes. I think they're funny. I think they add humor to things. So there was something playful and funny to me about draping a gnome. And then I was excited to sew it together later. But you can see first I just drape it. And then I mark it like crazy with that Sharpie. And then I'll show you later that I sew it. So this is at a glance, and I'm gonna walk you through the process a little bit. So like I said, the first step is picking an object that interests you. Definitely when you're getting started, pick something that's maybe not as complicated, maybe doesn't have like a lot of tiny parts or something that you can simplify. So something you're excited about, but something not super complicated. You are definitely capable of draping something complicated, but I believe in having lots of little successes to build your confidence up to the harder, more complicated things. So let's start simple and build up to the complicated. What's funny about this gnome is, can you tell that it actually lights up? What's hard about getting started on draping things that weren't meant for the body is they're often like hard or plastic or wood. And you saw when I was draping that dress form, that mannequin, it was soft and I could stick the pins in it. So often when I'm getting started, I'll actually tape my fabric to the edge that I'm starting on so that it doesn't move. So I just use like a strong masking tape. And then I'll cut strips to, at least for this particular shape, this gnome, I went with strips because I knew, this gnome had like all these different ups and downs, kind of peaks and valleys, and I knew that the strips would help me get that shape. But if you're draping, I don't know, like a bowl or a pan, you could cut a circle if you know that the shape is a circle, or you could cut a panel. Like you kind of, and that's what's fun about this. This is trial and error. You're playing with draping something that maybe you wouldn't have normally thought to drape. So don't panic if it's doesn't seem obvious at first. Like you might have to try a shape, and if it doesn't work, you try a different shape. And that's why it's good to have scrap fabric or an old bed sheet that you don't care about, because you can just cut new panels, try taping it and pinning it. The ultimate goal is there's no tape, that it's all pinned on there, but it takes a little, like one piece at a time, pinning it. And you can see here, I put on a good movie or a good podcast because this takes a lot of patience. It's like cutting a strip, pinning it, trimming it, smoothing it. Remember, bumps are the enemy of draping. And it's just a little bit at a time, like pinning the, and sometimes I might use tape to hold something in place while I pin something else in. So it's a negotiation of like pinning this next piece. And I'm putting in a pin like every 2 fingers. And if you're not used to pinning, that's okay. I got good at pinning from practice. And you can see here, I'm starting to get close to that edge that I taped. So I'm just pinning a little bit, pinning a little bit, pinning a little bit, and just moving along with these panels. So once I've pinned all the panels of fabric on and I've removed that tape, then it becomes about really just finessing. So then I'm just going to go through everything, and I'm going to pinch it and move the fabric and repin it so that I'm really happy with the fit. And I don't know if you can tell, but when I have my scissors handy, because when I see a curve, I actually clip it. I don't clip into where the pins are. I clip really close to the pins, and that actually opens up that curve and allows it to kind of fit better. And you actually do that when you sew as well. If you're sewing curves, once you've sewn the sewn line, you snip it with the scissors, but you don't cut through the sewn line. You get really close to it. So this, like I said, this is really a slow process. You just kind of accept and get comfortable with it being slow, and you let yourself kind of enjoy the process. And even though maybe it feels tedious, just kind of knowing that it's going to take a lot of time. Can you see all my little snips here? And I've actually changed outfits because I split this into multiple days. Because when I'm doing a big sewing project, I don't like to pressure myself to do something really fast. I like to give myself the space to enjoy the process and take my time and do it right. So as far as how long should you keep finessing it and keep pinning and repinning and smoothing and trimming, that's really up to you. It's like, what is your end goal and how fitted do you want your drape to be? And you could also try this drape with stretch fabric, and it probably wouldn't be as much of a negotiation because the stretch will actually form around some of those edges. I'm actually using a cotton woven, which is pretty standard for industry draping. Unless you're going to be sewing a stretch fabric, you should drape with the type of fabric that you want to ultimately sew with. Next, it's really going to come down to marking it like crazy. So I always write 1, 2, 3, like each piece gets a number. For the gnome, I wrote where the hat was, where the face was, where the feet was. And that's so that when I take those pieces off, I can make sense of it, because they just look like these crazy abstract shapes. So the rule of draping is you cannot mark your patterns too much. So I actually trace the pin line where all the pins were, and then I label everything. Next, I just cut all my pattern pieces out of the colored fabrics that I want to sew it out of. So I chose to make each piece a different color, but that was just because I wanted it to be fun and whimsical. And you can see I've got that 1/2 inch seam allowance built in around the edge. So I trimmed it to exactly a 1/2 inch. So I know that I'll be sewing a 1/2 inch away from the edge. So then I just made I actually cut enough to make 12 fabric gnomes. So then I sewed all 12 gnomes together, and then I started playing with what does it look like on the body. If you don't have a dress form or a mannequin, you could carefully try it on a friend or a sibling, because you might have pins in it. But so this is 6 gnomes sewn together. I ultimately sewed 12 together, and to me this was just play. I didn't have any direction in mind. I just was like, oh, I could fit my arm through here. I used a serger. That's what that special stitch is. You could easily use a regular machine. And all of this is experimentation. So just try to have fun with it and try stuff, and don't have the pressure that it needs to look like anything that's ever been worn before. Remember I said I had some examples of other weird stuff I'd draped. So on the left is a hair crimper, and on the right is a dustpan. And I never did anything more than just sort of make little sketches with these, because I didn't love the shape as much as I loved the gnome. And here's some cool stuff some of my students made. The one on the top left was mustard bottles. The one on the bottom was a vest made out of traffic cones. And the dress cape on the right was made from IKEA side tables. So you can make really cool and unusual and unexpected things by draping things as sculptures and just seeing how to wear them. Discover how to wear them after you make them. Keep in touch. I'd love to see anything that you make. If you want to tag me on social media, I will totally comment and respond. Good luck and experiment and try cool things.